Pacific Theater, 1943, 18,000 feet. The cockpit of a Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Captain J is looking straight ahead. 20 dots on the horizon. They are growing. At the last briefing, the squadron commander spoke in the flat voice of a man who had explained the same thing too many times. Never get into a turning fight with a Zero. Never. You are not in a dogfighting airplane. You are in a weapons delivery platform that happens to fly. Nodded. Everyone nodded. That was a week ago. His squadron is a mile and a half behind him now. The radio is quiet. 20 A6M Zeros are already on an intercept course. A Japanese Zero weighs 6,025 pounds. Its turn radius is the of any fighter that flew in the Second World War. Since 1937, China, Malaya, Pearl Harbor, Japanese pilots had killed everything that tried to match them in a horizontal turning fight. In the first 6 months of the Pacific War, Zeros destroyed American aircraft at a ratio of 3-to-1, sometimes higher. The P-47 weighs 17,500 pounds. In a horizontal fight against a Zero, that weight is a death sentence written in the language of physics. 1 aircraft, 20 opponents. By every calculation American pilots were trained to make from their first hour in a cockpit, had roughly 40 seconds left. Not one of those 20 Japanese pilots shot him down. Not one closed to a final firing position. Not one went home with a confirmed kill. What they did not know about the airplane they were attacking, the P-47 would demonstrate in the next 20 minutes. None of them were ready for that lesson. In the spring of 1942, the United States Army Air Forces published a tactical advisory for pilots operating in the Pacific Theater. The document ran to 11 pages. The most important sentence was 6 words long: do not dogfight with the Zero. It was not a suggestion. The Zero had been killing American pilots since before most of them knew there was a war. At Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft destroyed 188 American planes on the ground and in the air. The A6M Zero flew top cover. It outran, outturned, and outclimbed everything the United States sent against it in those first months. American pilots who survived their first encounter with a Zero did so mainly because the Japanese pilot ran out of ammunition or chose a different target, not because the American found a way to beat him. The kill ratio through early 1942 ran at 3 American aircraft lost for every 1 Zero destroyed, in some engagements higher. The problem was structural, not in the airframes, in the thinking. American fighter doctrine in 1941 was built on a single premise: the pilot who holds altitude controls the fight. Climb above your enemy, dive to attack, zoom back to altitude, repeat. Every manual, every briefing, every training program enforced this logic. It was not wrong as a general principle. Against the Zero, it was catastrophically incomplete. The Zero did not need altitude advantage to kill you. It needed one thing: for you to turn. The A6M had a roll rate and turn radius that no American fighter of 1941 or 1942 could match at low speeds. The moment an American pilot committed to a horizontal turn, standard evasive doctrine, he handed the Japanese pilot a geometry problem with a predetermined solution. The Zero swung inside his arc. The guns lined up. The fight was over. American commanders understood this in the abstract. In practice, doctrine is what pilots do when they stop thinking, and doctrine said, turn to evade. 3 attempts to solve the problem produced 3 failures. Attempt 1. P-40 engaged Zero fighters over the Philippines and at Pearl Harbor using standard turning combat. Result: the P-40 is faster in a straight line than the Zero, but American pilots break into turns the moment they feel threatened. The Zero follows them through every arc. December 1941 through March 1942, the Pacific Air Forces lose pilots faster than replacement training can provide them. Attempt 2. F4F Wildcats over Guadalcanal, August through November 1942. The Wildcat is slower and heavier than the Zero. The solution is the weave, a 2-aircraft defensive maneuver that forces an attacking Zero to pass through a crossfire. It works for pairs of aircraft. A single Wildcat, separated from its wingman, is still a target. The tactic requires 2 planes to function. It offers no answer for the pilot who finds himself alone. Attempt 3. P-38 Lightnings over New Guinea in early 1943. The P-38 has speed and altitude performance the Zero cannot match. In a diving hit-and-run attack, it is effective. When the engagement breaks down into a turning fight at medium altitude, which it frequently does when coordination is lost, American pilots die. The P-38's size and twin-engine configuration make it sluggish in tight maneuvering. The Zero turns inside it at will. By mid-1943, the tactical picture had clarified into a single brutal fact. Any American fighter pilot who accepted a slow-speed turning engagement with a Zero in the Pacific was operating on borrowed time. The number written against this fact was 3-1, 3 American aircraft for every Zero. The solution the Air Forces settled on was the P-47 Thunderbolt. On paper, this looked like escalating the problem. The P-47D weighed 17,500 pounds fully loaded. Its and Whitney R-2800 double Wasp produced 2,000 horsepower, but that engine was wrapped in an airframe the size of a small truck. The aircraft had a wingspan of 40 feet and a fuselage so wide that ground crews called it the Jug. It climbed slowly. It turned like a barge in a river delta. A Zero pilot who caught a P-47 in a slow horizontal turning fight had what the situation appeared to offer: a large, lumbering target that could not get out of the way. What the P-47 carried that no tactical manual had yet fully accounted for was this: 8 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, 425 rounds per gun, and a dive performance that the Whitney engine and the aircraft's structural weight turned into something close to a physical law. At altitude in a dive, the P-47 accelerated past speeds the Zero's airframe could not tolerate. Above roughly 460 kilometers per hour, the A6M's ailerons became unresponsive. The aircraft's light construction, no armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, control surfaces built to minimize weight at the expense of high-speed rigidity, became liabilities the moment the fight moved into a vertical plane. The Zero's designers had built the world's most dangerous low-speed fighter. They had built it at the cost of making it a different aircraft entirely above 350 knots. Most American pilots in 1943 knew the theory. What they did not yet have was the experience of a single pilot taking that principle to its endpoint. 1 aircraft, 20 opponents, no wingman, no second chance. Demonstrating what the physics actually produced when pushed to the limit. Was about to provide that demonstration. He did not dive because he was brave. He dived because he understood that at 17,500 pounds, gravity was the only weapon he had that 20 Zeros could not match. The dots stopped being dots at roughly 4 miles. At 3 miles, could count them. He counted twice. 20 A6M Zeros in a loose formation, descending slightly, coming directly at him from the northeast. They had altitude on him. They had the sun at their backs. They had everything the tactical situation could offer a formation of fighters about to engage a single aircraft. His right hand moved to the throttle. The R-2800 double Wasp was already at cruise power, 1,850 horsepower turning a 13-foot propeller. He pushed the throttle to the stop. The engine note deepened. The airframe shuddered once and steadied. Airspeed, 310 knots indicated. The P-47 at full military power at 18,000 feet was not a slow airplane. Against 20 fighters with altitude advantage, speed in a straight line bought him approximately nothing. The Zeros split into attack elements. Standard Japanese fighter doctrine. The lead section drops to engage. Secondary elements come wide to cut off escape routes. Watched the formation geometry open up and understood what it meant. They were building a box. Close the box fast enough with enough aircraft, and the target has no direction to go that isn't already occupied. He put the nose down and pushed. T+0. Rolls the P-47 into a 70-degree dive. The airspeed indicator begins moving immediately. 320 knots, 340. The first Zero element breaks toward him, the lead aircraft dropping its nose into a firing run. At this closure rate, the Japanese pilot has approximately 8 seconds to a firing solution. T+6 seconds, 360 knots. The lead Zero opens fire at long range, 600 yards, oblique angle, tracers pass wide left, does not turn to evade, turning bleed speed. Speed is the only thing that matters now. T+12 seconds, 390 knots. The Zero cannot hold the diving angle. Its control surfaces are designed for low-speed maneuverability, light, responsive, optimized for the turning fight that defined Japanese doctrine since China in 1937. Above 350 knots, those same surfaces begin to stiffen. The pilot pushes harder against increasing resistance. The Zero starts losing ground on the P-47. T plus 20 seconds, 420 knots. A second Zero element comes from the left, trying to cut across the P-47's path and establish a crossing shot. The geometry requires them to be faster than 420 knots in a lateral move. They are not. Watch as the second element fall behind his left wing and keeps the nose down. T plus 35 seconds, 460 knots. The airspeed needle is past the yellow arc on the gauge. At this speed, the P-47's 17,500 pounds of mass and the Whitney's 2,000 horsepower are no longer liabilities. They are the only thing happening. The aircraft is not shaking. The controls are not lightening dangerously. The Jug was built for this. Republic Aviation's engineers had stressed the airframe to handle battle damage, high-G maneuvers, and emergency dives. The safety margins were not conservative estimates. They were facts. The P-47 at 460 knots is stable, controllable, exactly what it was designed to be. T plus 45 seconds. He pulls out of the dive, converting vertical speed into horizontal energy. G-forces build through the pullout. Vision grays at the edges. He holds the pull smooth, not sharp. A sharp pull at this speed compresses the G-forces into a spike that puts a pilot unconscious. He keeps the pressure steady. Vision returns as the nose rises above the horizon. Airspeed still 410 knots in level flight. He looks back. The lead Zero is 900 yards behind and 400 feet below, still in its own recovery from the dive. It pulled out early, conservative, by the book, correctly. The pilot protected his airframe and kept control. He is now slow, wings level, bleeding speed. He is not a threat at 900 yards doing 280 knots. T plus 90 seconds. 3 Zeros from the secondary element have swung wide and positioned themselves above and to the right, trying to cut off the altitude climb. Sees them and does not climb. He turns hard into them, not a full turn, a hard jinking brake that presents the smallest possible target for a deflection shot, then rolls out and pushes the nose down again. Second dive. The Zeros are fast enough to follow the brake but not fast enough to hold a firing solution through it. Their guns track where he was, not where he is. T plus 2 minutes 15 seconds, 450 knots again. Second dive follows the same physics as the first. The Zero elements that attempt to follow bleed off the pursuit before 400 knots. The ones that hold back and try to position for the exit stay too wide to threaten. T plus 3 minutes through T plus 8 minutes. The pattern repeats. Dive, pull out with energy, jink hard to break any firing solution that is forming, dive again. Each cycle uses the .850 caliber guns sparingly. 2 short bursts in the first 10 minutes, aimed at Zeros that close to inside 400 yards on pullout. The guns are not his primary weapon today. Speed is his weapon. The .50 calibers are there to make Japanese pilots think twice before closing, to interrupt their attack geometry. To buy the half second, a dive needs to build back to 420 knots. T plus 9 minutes. A Zero closes from directly behind during a pullout, the most dangerous position, directly in trail, closing fast from below. Feels the aircraft take 2 hits. The P-47 absorbs them. No warning lights. No change in engine note. The R-2800 runs at full power as if nothing happened. He pushes into another dive. T plus 12 minutes. The formation is no longer a formation. 20 aircraft have fragmented into independent elements pursuing independent attack lines. Some are high, some are low. 2 have broken off entirely. The coordinated box that was supposed to close around him 18 minutes ago no longer exists as a coherent shape. T plus 15 through T plus 18 minutes. The engagements are now 1-on-1 and 2-on-1, not 20-on-1. Each Japanese pilot working alone solves the same equation and reaches the same answer. The P-47 is unreachable in a dive, and in a turning fight because it refuses to turn. Keeps moving, keeps the speed above 380 knots, keeps the dives steep enough to open distance every time someone closes. T plus 19 minutes 30 seconds. A gap opens in the pursuit geometry. 2 elements are repositioning. The nearest Zero is 700 yards away and not in a firing attitude. puts the nose on a heading toward Allied lines, and pushes the throttle to the stop. The double wasp pulls him away from the engagement at 340 knots in level flight. The nearest Zero gives chase for approximately 90 seconds, falls behind, and breaks off. The engagement is over. At the airbase, Squadron had completed its mission and returned. His aircraft was not in the pattern. His aircraft was not on the radio. The operations officer logged the time. Aircraft overdue by 22 minutes. Standard procedure was to wait 30 minutes before updating the status board. Nobody at the base knew there was a fight happening. No one knew where it was happening. The radio frequencies were quiet. There was no distress call. There was no call at all. At 32 minutes overdue, a ground crewman near the perimeter heard an engine. He looked up. A P-47 with 2 fresh holes in the fuselage came straight in on final approach. No radio call, gear down, flaps down, exactly on the center line. The lead Zero pilot had engaged single American fighters before. The procedure was direct. Bring the formation down on top of the target, establish firing positions from multiple angles simultaneously, close the box before the target can break out of it. 20 aircraft against 1 was not a combat engagement. It was a removal. The American would turn to evade. They always turned. And the formation's geometry would produce a firing solution within the first 30 seconds. The American did not turn. The lead pilot followed the P-47 into its dive and immediately felt something wrong with the arithmetic. His Zero was not closing. He pushed the throttle harder. The aircraft shook. At this speed, the control surfaces were fighting him. He was at the edge of the structural envelope he knew by feel, the speed where the Zero's ailerons went from responsive to stiff to almost immovable. He knew exactly where that edge was. He had been trained on it. He backed off the dive angle. The P-47 pulled away. When he pulled out of his own dive and looked for the target, the American was already 900 yards ahead, climbing, energy intact. The geometry that was supposed to be decisive, 20 aircraft surrounding 1, had produced a situation where the surrounding aircraft were all slower and lower than the target they were surrounding. He called to his wingmen and reformed an attack element, 3 aircraft, coming from above and left, cutting angle on the target's pullout. The P-47 broke hard into them before the firing solution was established. He watched the American's aircraft jink through the attack line and roll away. The break was too fast. The tracking solution was gone before it started. The lead pilot had been flying since 1940. He had kills over Malaya. He had seen American pilots in P-40s, in Wildcats, in twin-engine fighters, in bombers. He had never seen an American single-engine fighter do this. The P-47 was not flying a pattern he recognized as evasion. It was flying a pattern he recognized from the mathematics of ballistics. At a certain speed, the target is moving faster than the gun can track it, and all the numerical advantage in the world cannot manufacture a firing solution that doesn't exist. By the 12th minute, his fuel calculations were becoming relevant. He had been at full throttle for most of the engagement. He called the fuel state to his wingmen. 2 aircraft in the secondary element were already at bingo fuel, minimum to return to base. They broke off. The formation was no longer 20. The P-47 was still there, still moving, still unreachable. He gave the signal to disengage. The target was on a heading toward Allied lines. Continuing the engagement at low fuel state over hostile territory was a tactical decision with a predictable outcome. He turned his Zero around and flew east. The P-47 grew small in his mirror and disappeared. The ground crew found 2 holes in the fuselage, both .30 caliber. One had entered through the left side of the rear fuselage and exited cleanly through the opposite skin, 14 inches of travel through aluminum. The second had struck a frame member and stopped. Neither had touched a fuel line, a control cable, or anything connected to the engine. The R-2800 had run at full military power for the entire engagement and continued running on the taxiway until cut the ignition switch. The aircraft was flyable the next morning. Had been airborne for 47 minutes. Approximately 20 of those minutes were the engagement. He had fired his guns twice. Combined expenditure, less than 80 rounds from 8 weapons with a total capacity of 3,400 rounds. The ammunition was not the limiting factor. It never was. The flight suit was soaked from the collar to the waist. At 18,000 feet, the cockpit temperature runs below freezing. That was not why. The mathematics of the engagement worked out to this. One pilot returned. No aircraft were confirmed destroyed on the Japanese side, though the records from this period and theater are incomplete. What was confirmed was that a P-47 had spent 20 minutes in sustained engagement against 20 fighters and landed with 2 holes in the fuselage and a full engine. The official report logged the engagement under a standard category. The language it used for the opposing force was not 20 aircraft or 20 fighters. The phrase the report used was superior enemy forces. 3 words. The number 20 does not appear anywhere in the document. The calculation that a single pilot had taken a 17,500-pound airplane into 20 consecutive attack runs against the most maneuverable fighter in the Pacific Theater and broken contact on his own terms, that calculation is not recorded in the summary line. It is present only if you read the body of the report carefully and count the attack sequences yourself. Most people who received the report did not count them. The tactical conclusion from engagements like this did not move through the air forces as a formal revelation. It moved the way most combat knowledge moves, pilot to pilot, briefing room to briefing room, through after-action reports that accumulated on desks until the pattern was too consistent to ignore. General George commanded the 5th Air Force in the Pacific. He was not a man who waited for patterns to become undeniable before acting on them. By 1943, his pilots had been accumulating the same data point from separate engagements across New Guinea, the Solomons, and the island chains north of Australia. The P-47 in a dive was not catchable. The Zero at high speed was not a fighter anymore. It was a large, unarmored aircraft with stiffening controls and a structural weight that worked against it the moment the fight left the horizontal plane. Formalized what his pilots had discovered the hard way. The 5th Air Force tactical directive issued to P-47 units was direct. Do not turn with the Zero under any circumstances. Use altitude. Use diving speed. Hit and extend. If the engagement becomes a turning fight at low speed, you have already made a mistake. Disengage and restart. The numbers before and after this doctrinal consolidation are not subtle. In the air battles over New Guinea in early 1943, before energy tactics were consistently applied, American fighter units were losing aircraft at ratios that made mission completion a secondary concern behind pilot survival. By the campaign in June 1944, the arithmetic had reversed completely. In the Battle of the Philippine Sea, American carrier pilots destroyed over 400 Japanese aircraft in 2 days of fighting against a loss of 29 of their own. The engagement acquired a nickname that came from the sheer scale of the disparity, the Great Turkey Shoot. The Zero pilots flying those missions were not inferior to the men who had fought over Pearl Harbor. Many of them were more experienced. What had changed was the American understanding of how to remove the Zero's advantages from the equation before the fight started. The weight of the P-47 had become doctrine. After the war ended, American and Japanese aviation officers sat across tables from each other in a series of technical debriefs organized by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey. The Japanese officers were precise and analytical. They had been building aircraft and training pilots since the 1930s, and they understood their own machines with the clarity that comes from years of combat. On the A6M Zero, their assessment was consistent across multiple interviews. The aircraft's structural philosophy, minimize weight, maximize maneuverability at low speed, accept zero margin for armor or self-sealing fuel, had been correct for the war Japan expected to fight in 1941. A short campaign, rapid air superiority, an enemy that had not yet developed the doctrine to counter a superior turning fighter. The Zero was designed for a 6-month war. It fought a 4-year one. By the time American pilots stopped accepting the horizontal turning fight and started forcing every engagement into a vertical plane, the A6M had no answer. Its designers had not built one in. There was no version of the Zero that fixed the high-speed aileron problem without rebuilding the aircraft from the frame outward. They had known about the limitation since the aircraft entered service. They had accepted it as a reasonable trade. At low speeds and low altitudes, the Zero's advantages were so dominant that the limitation seemed theoretical. And pilots like him had demonstrated it was not theoretical. It was a physical boundary, and the P-47 weighed enough to find it every time. A decade after the war ended, a young Air Force captain named John Boyd was flying F-86 Sabres in Korea and thinking about why certain pilots consistently won engagements while flying aircraft with comparable performance to their opponents. He began writing equations. The equations described something the Pacific pilots had found by instinct: that combat advantage is not a product of maximum speed or turn radius in isolation. It is a product of how quickly an aircraft can transition from one energy state to another, from fast to slow, from climbing to diving, from one direction to a completely different one. Boyd called it energy maneuverability theory. He turned it into a mathematical framework that the Air Force initially ignored and then quietly incorporated into every major fighter procurement decision from the F-15 onward. The F-15's design requirements, the specific combination of thrust-to-weight ratio, wing loading, and structural limits that make it the aircraft it is, were shaped directly by Boyd's equations. The F-16 was designed around them from the start. The F-35's flight envelope reflects the same principles. The theory had a precise origin in Boyd's Korean combat experience. That experience had a precise origin in Pacific doctrine. The Pacific doctrine had a precise origin in engagements where P-47 pilots discovered by necessity that a 17,500-pound airplane moving at 460 knots could not be caught, turned with, or destroyed by the most maneuverable fighter ever built, because the most maneuverable fighter ever built had been optimized for the one speed range where its advantages existed. The P-47 that flew that day is gone. The airframe was not preserved. The 5th Air Force records from that period are held at the Air Force Historical Research Agency at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, filing cabinets in a climate-controlled building where engagement reports sit alongside technical analyses and tactical directives, most of them never read by anyone outside the small community of military historians who know to ask for them. What survived is in the equations, in the performance specifications of every American fighter designed after 1953, in the doctrine taught at the Naval Fighter Weapons School from its founding in 1969 through the present day, that the pilot who controls the energy state of the engagement controls the engagement itself, and that weight, properly managed, is not a disadvantage. It is a weapon. Knew that before the equations existed to describe it. He knew it at 18,000 feet with 20 zeros on an intercept course and a throttle pushed to the stop, because the only alternative was to turn, and turning was the one thing the 17,500-pound airplane was never going to win. So he fell instead. And the physics worked exactly as they had to.